My name is Chris Peakin.
I'm Dan Hope, and our project is Dev Quiz. What did we build? Me and Chris built a multiple choice quiz application focused on various coding languages and systems, and also styled for a retro computer game feel to it. Why did we build it? It was mainly to create a fun and simple user experience of people new to coding. By that, I mean our questions were a bit more like it would be the answer, and it'd be a very obvious answer, but also it was kind of more of like a fun setting to it, so that'd be kind of like jokey, like wrong answers. And I think it kind of matches quite well with the retro feel to it. And also, it was to build. We really wanted to build a project from scratch without an already built API, so we could demonstrate our fundamental skills, which we'd learn all over the course.
On the front end, we've built the app using React. We've done the styling with CSS, and we've used Axios to communicate with the database/backend. The quiz is basically structured that we created a component to take a quiz, which allows the user to pick a quiz out of what's available and then rolls through each question one by one. I will show you my browser. Because I'm logged in, we have got my username here, and the sidebar is showing me my username and a logout button. If I were not logged in, then it would show a register or login button. So let's take a quiz. Here we've got these presented as a list of quizzes. These are the buttons that we can pick. So if I was to pick HTML, HTML would be set to as my desired quiz. Let's pick JavaScript. So here we've got the current question, 1 out of 5, and my current score, 0 out of 5. And the actual question, how do we console log the first element of an array? Console.log my array 0. Now, because I've answered a question, it's increased the question number by 1. Because I answered it correctly, it's increased my score by 1. What is the symbol for multiplication? It's a star. I'm going to deliberately answer this one incorrectly. What makes JavaScript good for web development? It has a funny name. That's not the correct answer. It's increased my question by 1, but it's not increased my score at all because that did not correspond with what the correct answer is. When I finish the quiz, it stops presenting the questions and it instead presents my score and this button to save my score to the database, and that'll be saved to my user. And we can click, I want to select another quiz. That'll reset the state of the desired quiz to empty, which is a falsie, which renders these cards instead. I'm also going to show the random quiz picks a quiz at random. If I click the logout button, then register and log in render instead. In the browser, we have the navbar on the top and the sidebar on the left-hand side. That's if it's in a browser, but if I click inspect and click on mobile phone, media queries have meant that the size of things has changed a bit, and also that the sidebar is now rendering underneath the navbar. Because if we were to have this approach on a mobile phone, the main body would be very compressed and it would not look good. In terms of the code, firstly, take a quiz. The available quizzes are made available throughout using context. And as I said before, desired quiz is initially, it's just empty until the user clicks one of the cards and that sets their desired quiz to, say, CSS or HTML or JavaScript or whatever. If desired quiz evaluates to a falsie, it renders the cards. And if it evaluates to a truthy, then it'll get rid of the cards and render execute quiz instead. So if we have a look at execute quiz, we've employed quite a lot of state to get this to work. Initially, the score number is kept as 0 and the question number is kept as 0, as has been shown before in the browser. The chosen answer is initially set to an empty string, and that's checked by clicking an answer button. These are the 4 answer buttons. Clicking on one of them sets the chosen answer to whatever that is. And the functionality checks that if the chosen answer corresponds to question.correct answer, it'll increase both the score number and the question number by 1. If chosen answer is not equal, if it's not an empty string, but nor is it not equal to the correct answer, it'll not increase the score, it'll just keep it as it is, and then increase the question number by 1. And we have some conditions where if the end of the quiz has been reached, then it'll show you have scored, say, 4 out of 5. And if the user is logged in, the button which offers to save the score is rendered. If the user is not logged in, then it won't render. This is just the take a quiz card. Very simple. Set desired quiz, whole quiz. That is how the user, if the user clicks on that button, that is what sets the desired quiz to that particular quiz. Unfortunately, we didn't quite have time to show the user the saved quizzes and the scores that they got. But however, I'm showing this because it shows that the post request, which posts the quiz and the score to the database, has worked. So put simply, the user has scored, has taken this quiz and scored 3. And the user has taken this other quiz and scored 2.
And for the project, I focused mainly on the back-end side of things. We decided tech-wise to go with Node.js, Express.js, and Mongoose. And for the database, actually, we decided not to go with a relational database and to go with a document-based one, such as Mongo, which we used. I think the reason why is we thought by using JSON document objects, we could flexibly structure our quiz data and user data and would fit more with our the functionality of the quiz. So one of the great things about using MongoDB for this, we managed to use the GUI called Mongo DB Compass, which was great for developing our each object with 3 separate collections where we would have to input our data in manually, which we had to do for this, obviously, because of for each question and user and quiz as well. It just made things a lot easier. So here, for example, we could just create our own objects here as like sort of dummy data here, and you can see I've hashed the passwords there as well. It's all created into like one object with the ID of the user, which is put in automatically when created as name, email, and password. And if you skip down here is where we had our saved quizzes, which could be when we saved a quiz, it would get sent to the user with the quiz ID. And I said one of the reasons we wanted to do it was the sort of flexibility as well. So say we have some of our saved quizzes here, we wanted to pass them over, send them to the user once the user had finished a quiz or was halfway through a quiz, or it was saved their scores, and then the questions themselves we would create separately and then put into the quizzes with their object ID as well. I also created routes and controllers which handled how the user selected and interacted with the quiz, as well as the routes and the controllers for the user registering and logging in. And also, as I mentioned when I was showing you Mongo Compass, I was using like hashed passwords and JWT tokens for authentication. So see, in the schemas I created had to match up with the structure I put into Mongo Compass. So I kind of started off with how we'd think the question model would be. With the user controller, I created a register user function which would check the user, hash the password, and then create a new user if the user obviously didn't exist as well. And then that would automatically create a ID, the username, email, and then generate a JWT token. And to log in, I created a controller for which would post the login information. It would check the user's credentials, and if the user and its password by using bcrypt compare, it would log them in if it matched up all the same credentials here. I also created a save quiz controller as well, which would use the which we We used a save quiz function as well, which would route the quiz the user was working on and save their score back to the user's data file. This was like one of the sort of the tricky things I think at the time, because it was everything using Mongoose was a bit new, so I had to use operators such as like add to set, which would add the quiz ID. First it would find the ID and then add it to saved quizzes. And also I'd created a controller function that would update the quiz score to the user using the put CRUD operator. But so it would like check if the user ID, quiz ID, if that was not their credentials, then the account would come back. But you see here, there was another example of me using the operators from Mongoose as well. So it would find one and update using and set the new score to the quiz ID within the user's object. And what developer practices did we adopt in this? So like mob programming, like me and Chris would be communicating quite a lot. So if we were stuck on one thing, we would each and we wanted to get someone else's sort of like view over it. Basically, we'd meet up, and one would be the driver, one would be coding as well. So that's one thing we implemented, like stand-ups as well, which we've been doing in the course. But we would meet up and have calls regularly, so like maybe like on a Saturday morning, or like 2 or 3 days a week, like in the evening as well, just to see where we're at and just sort of throw some ideas around as well. I used Figma personally to sort of like map out the structure of the back end and the logic of it as well. And we both also used Trello to sort of keep a schedule of like all the tasks what we need to do, so we had an overview of everything that kind of like needed to be done, and if we had more ideas we would add them to them and so forth.
When it comes to what challenges we encountered, firstly starting with the back end, when we were doing the back end module about 2 months ago, we were using MySQL Workbench, MySQL, and SQLize, whereas the database that we used for this project was Mongo DB. Now, that was something we have used before quite recently, but it was a new experience for us using that as opposed to the previous databases that we'd used before. Sticking to the back end, the structure of the quiz data was a challenge. Like, how was the data going to be structured? And the way it's structured in the back end, we need to consider, is it usable by the front end? So myself and Dan needed to, have good dialogue about how the data was structured, because how the back end structured the data would inform how it would be rendered in the front end. Moving on to the front end side of things, the challenge for me was how to actually like execute the quiz and how the user's going to experience it. Because we did discuss some quizzes could present all the questions all at once, or just one at a time. And we both agreed that we would prefer one at a time. So I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to do that until it clicked. And I was able to, the way I rendered it, I was able to render one question at a time. And I think in terms of the components and how everything passed down, that was a challenge to get that working properly. And I was quite happy with what we ended up in the end. The style of the app was also a challenge as well, because obviously I wanted to stick to the retro theme, but at the same time have it pleasing to the eye. And also this kind of app is more likely to be used, I would say, by mobile phone users and tablet users rather than someone on a desktop or a laptop even. So obviously I had to be very conscious of how it looked on mobiles and tablets as opposed to computers, even though computer use was obviously the first thing in mind when styling it. I did have to think very carefully and make it look good on a mobile as well. And Chrome DevTools helped considerably with that, visualizing it on a mobile phone. Although the idea, the MVP, was fairly simple, we would have found plenty to do in addition to that if we'd had more time. I think one of the first things we thought about was to create a leaderboard which keeps the user's high score per quiz. So essentially you would click onto a quiz and it would show you the username and the score. So you could see which user has scored the highest. I mentioned styling as a challenge, and I was using media queries to make it suitable for mobile phones and smaller devices. But something else that came to mind is to do media queries for when people select dark mode on their devices. That would have involved like a different background image and probably some inverted colors. That would have taken some time to figure out how to make it still look nice. I think also when the user is actually going through the quiz, I think it could have been possible. If we had more time, we could have made it a bit more interactive. For instance, if I selected the wrong answer, the answer that I'd selected, the button would have turned, say, red, and then one of the other 4 buttons would have turned green to say that is actually the correct answer. We did manage to add authentication. We did manage to add a register and a login page, but another thought that occurred may have been to add a Facebook login button, which we have done in a previous project. And also, if we were to go down that route, possibly look into sharing quiz results via Facebook. Finally, due to some last-minute technical issues, unfortunately, we were not able to render the saved quizzes on the saved quizzes page. So if we'd had a bit more time, I think that probably would have been one of the first things we would have looked at. I hope you've enjoyed watching this presentation. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all the tutors and staff at Manchester Codes for all their support over the past 6 months. And I'd also like to thank Dan as well, my project partner, for us working so well together.
Thank you for watching our presentation. That's all from us. And thank you to all the tutors and all of the rest of the students on the cohort.